welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. My name is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners, and I'm here with my co-host, Walter Dial, who is a partner at Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman, CPAs located in Bethesda, Maryland. If you've ever been a partner in a business, you know that it is not an uncommon occurrence for partners to disagree on how to do things. Disagreements can happen over relatively small things, such as how to create a client presentation or do a podcast, or big and strategic issues like the future direction of the business. But it is certain at some point, there's just no question about it, it's going to happen. At some point, there's going to be disagreement. And if disagreements are not handled in a healthy and productive way, of course, conflict can easily occur, and conflict can be not just damaging, but even destructive if not addressed properly. We've found in doing the work that we do that it's most often wise to get outside expert help if partner conflict goes unresolved for any period of time. And so today's topic is how partner relations can impact the value and success of a business. And Walter is going to introduce our guest, David Gage.
Thanks, Pat. Our guest, David Gage, who's been a friend and client for well over 20 years and has actually worked with some of my clients, is a leader in the field of business mediation and the founder of BMC Associates. Dr. Gage has over 25 years of experience as a mediator and 30 years of experience as a clinical psychologist. In his clinical practice, he specialized in couples, family, and group therapy. He has spoken to bar associations and business and professional organizations locally and nationally, has been interviewed on radio and TV, and was featured in the New York Times, Fortune, Nation's Business, and the Washington Post. Dr. Gage's book on effective partnerships, which we strongly recommend to everybody, The Partnership Charter, How to Start Out Right with Your New Business Partnership or Fix the One You're In, was published in July of 2004. So David, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Walter and Pat.
Let's jump right in. So, it's always interested me because you're a clinical psychologist. Isn't it kind of unusual for a clinical psychologist to be working with business partners and family business owners?
I'd say it is a little unusual. Typically, psychologists get involved more with public companies and consulting to public companies, or oftentimes with executive coaching. But I'll tell you, I grew up in a family business. Actually, both my grandfathers were entrepreneurs. One went into business with another gentleman out in Appleton, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And my other grandfather started a business, and eventually after World War II, his sons joined him in the business. And then my father even joined in the business. So he was the son-in-law. And growing up in the family business, I learned a lot about the challenges of being business partners, family or non-family partners. It's not easy. And I would say, Walter, in response to your question, growing up in a family business did probably get me interested in psychology. And after I got into psychology, I early in my career, I specialized in working with families. I was teaching psychiatry residents at the University of Maryland Medical School how to work with families. And it was about that time that I realized not only my family, but other people who are partners or family businesses, when they get a little sideways with one another, they really didn't have very many places to turn. So some of them would turn to their attorneys, or Walter, to their accountants. As you know, I'm sure you've had that experience, and sort of beg for help with resolving these conflicts. But that's not easy to do, to help partners with that. And as a professional, you can get pulled into the middle of their conflicts, which is a kind of dangerous position for a lawyer or an attorney whose client is the partnership or the family business. Because while the professional might be perceived as neutral and think of him or herself as neutral, when you get into these conflicts and they get really difficult among partners, it's a little hard to maintain your neutrality, but more difficult is being perceived as neutral throughout the course of events. So I thought about it a lot in the early 80s and thought about, well, how can I help them? And realized that being a psychologist was a good background. I understood people and dynamics and conflicts. But what about business? And I thought, geez, do I have to go to law school or to go and get an MBA? And then I thought, I don't really want to do that. And you know what? Working in this context with partners, it might be really good to have a team. So that was my one stroke of genius. I thought, I need a team to do this. So from the get-go, when I started the business around 1990, I had a team. I had people with backgrounds in not only psychology, but also law and business and finance. And we would always put together kind of a team that really was a custom team to fit the needs of the client. So were there issues, legal issues involved in their dispute, or were there business issues, financial issues? And most often, they were a mix of psychological or interpersonal issues and business issues. So that's kind of where it started and how I got involved. And really, to this day, the firm that I started, this multidisciplinary firm, is a bit unique in the country. So we've been, for 25 years, we've been working all over the country with partners who found themselves in conflict, or as I like to say, kind of sideways with one another.
I remember one of the clients that you helped me with, I had been going down there every year for, I think, 3 or 4 years. They would have their year end. It was basically a financial meeting where we'd figure out what the profit was and how it was going to be split up amongst the partners. And every year, at least 2 of the partners would be unhappy, usually at least one of them in tears. And it was clear to me, it had nothing to do with necessarily the dollars and cents. It may have had something to do with what those dollars represented. But after the second year of going through this, it was clear they had issues. So I contacted David. David came in, worked with them. I can honestly say the last couple of years' meetings have been half the time and been very smooth. So, David, I appreciate that.
That is great.
So he's making your life a little easier, too. Huh?
Exactly. And not to mention how much easier he's made their lives.
Yeah, and so, David, regarding the business issues and along the lines of what Walter was just talking about, and the work that we do, as you know, increasing the value and sellability of a business is most often central to a successful plan for exit or succession. And I'm wondering, could you take some time to describe how you've observed through your practice over the last number of years, describe how partner relations can impact the value of a business, either positively or not so positively?
Well, one example I can give is kind of interesting, and I just ran across it the other day, going through my old records of clients and tossing out the ones that were very, very old. I ran across one, and in the file was a valuation of the business in Bethesda that came to us because they were having real differences over the direction of the business. What the business was going to continue to do, where it was going to sort of put its money and what direction it was going to go in. And you'd think, wouldn't partners be clear about the business that they're in and where it should go? But actually, partners oftentimes get going with the idea of a business and they get it launched and they're off and running, but they haven't had real in-depth discussions about what they're doing and where they want to go. So, or circumstances change and they have different ideas about it. So they had different ideas about it, these two. And it resulted in conflict between the two of them, and it spread to their key employees, which these conflicts among partners often do. And, it's the classic, well, the employees took sides, and it's almost like they're wearing T-shirts. They're on one person's side or another person's side. And when they came to me, they shared a valuation that they had gotten from a valuation firm. And lo and behold, there it was in black and white. Because the partners, and everybody realizes they're in conflict, we cannot value. We sort of have to discount the value of the firm because that really detracts from their ability to be a successful firm. So it was a real discount. It wasn't an insignificant one either. If I recall correctly, it may have cut the value by 40, 50%.
So then could you take that example and describe, because you got involved, right, as a mediator? Can you describe what that looked like, the process, and what it looked like for those partners?
Gosh. It was fascinating in a number of respects, Pat. One was just getting them engaged. One of the partners was referred to us by another professional, and he said, look, I'm having trouble with my partner. We're 50-50 partners. My partner doesn't want to do anything about this. He's very dominating. So I told him about, he was calling for mediation, and I told him about how it works and how he could explain it to his partner in a way that would sound like, hey, this is a good route for us to go. And he said, okay, I'll go do it. And I didn't hear from him. And 6 months later, I heard from him again. He said, well, it's gotten worse. I said, really? Well, what happened? Well, he just refused. And I need some more help, how to convince my partner to do this. So I gave him some more help, some more ideas, some more thoughts about how to talk to his partner. And then again, I didn't hear from him. And about 6 months later, he calls and he said, well, I just wanted to let you know it's too late now. I've got a lawyer. I'm ready to sue my partner. I said, what happened? What about mediation? He said, well, we tried that. I said, you did? You tried it? I didn't hear about it. And he said, no. My partner would only agree to have our accountant do the mediation for us. And it wasn't Walter, by the way, or anyone from Walter's firm. But he told me we had this accountant. It was our accountant, and I agreed because I trusted him. They did the mediation, and he said, I started looking at the bills from the accountant, and he was talking to my partner way more than he was talking to me. So I really got suspicious.
First off, was the accountant a trained mediator?
No. He wasn't a trained mediator, number one, Pat. And number two, even if he had been a trained mediator, he shouldn't have been mediating these two partners with whom he already had an existing relationship. And
because of the neutrality
issue. When the going gets tough, it's hard to maintain it's hard to be perceived as being neutral by the parties. So that broke down. So he was ready to sue, and he was ready to take the company to receivership. He was ready to go to court and say, Judge, take this out of our hands because my partner is just, railroading me. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to do that, go tomorrow morning and tell your partner that that's what you're ready to do. If he won't agree to mediation with a neutral outside mediator. And so he did that. And the partner, faced with the threat of a lawsuit, agreed. And we worked with them, and the two of them, and it went pretty well. In that they agreed that one partner would buy the other one out. So that looked good. They agreed on the terms and everything. They took it back to their key employees and said, hey, here's what's happening, guys. And they thought the key employees might be happy, but some of the key employees said, sorry, we're not willing to stay working for that partner.
Mm-hmm. Which that, of course, we see this often.
Yeah.
Impacts the value of a business.
Oh my God,
significantly.
If they weren't willing, the sale never, it just wouldn't have been viable. So that partner knew that, and we understood that we made a mistake. by not involving the key employees in that mediation a little sooner. But luckily for everybody and for us, they were willing to sit back down at the table and have us talk to the key employees, and we expanded the mediation a little bit. And within, I would say, 2 months, we had, of periodic meetings during that 2 months, we reached another agreement where, and this is sort of typical of the kinds of changes that you see partners agreeing to in order to get out of conflict. They were 50-50 partners. They both agreed to become 40-40 partners, free up 20% of the ownership for key employees and for, this is key also, for bringing in somebody else from the outside to be the new president of the firm, not the dominant partner, 50-50 partner. And they agreed to establish a board of directors that would include the two of them and one, I think, key employee and one or two outside experienced business people. So they changed the ownership, they changed the leadership, and they changed the governance. Those are the kinds of changes we often see partners making in order to resolve conflict.
Did it end up being a success story?
Oh my gosh, it did, Pat. They kept going for about, I think, 5 more years, maybe even a little bit more, and eventually selling the business for many millions more than they had been valued at when they were before they worked with us.
Can you give us an idea of how long that process took with that particular situation?
Yeah, I would say, it took about a year and a half from the first phone call to when they started the mediation with us. And then I would say it was about probably less than 6 months. So that was a good example of how two partners had a business that was struggling. They were struggling. The value was deflated to a very happy ending.
So they got a very nice return on investment. Paying your fee and getting you guys involved.
Yes.
The value of their company was not just preserved, but increased, and they got a nice multiple as a result. Very good.
And I think that was a good example, too, of partners who hadn't done really that planning for the direction that they wanted to take the business, much less planning about the exit.
So after spending over 25 years dealing with various dysfunctional partnerships, how do you feel about the partnership form as a form of doing business?
It's such a good question, because many business advisors advise people to stay away from partnerships like the plague. Actually, really. They really just out and out tell people, don't do a partnership, or even worse, a family business. Don't bring your kids, your spouse, your siblings into the business with you, because they're just very difficult.
Yeah, I had one client of ours who he never took on a partner, and his uncle had told him years ago, a partnership is a sinking ship. and so he never
to put it bluntly.
Right. So you've probably heard similar things.
So I have, but it flies in the face of sort of logic and what we know, and now I'm happy to say also some research that demonstrates that having partners is such an advantage. So if we think about it, and we think about the companies that are out there today and the big companies that are out there today, so many of them are founded by partners, and they'll have the names of partners in them, or their companies like Microsoft and Google that were founded by partners, and they just either they're successful or not. But the research now, there's some research, like for example, some research by the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Mass, that looked at how do solo entrepreneurs do compared to partners. And in that research, they found that, and I'll quote this, projects run by partnerships were 5 times more likely to reach commercialization, and they had mean revenues approximately 10 times greater than projects run by solo entrepreneurs. So, I mean, those numbers are kind of astonishing. But they also confirm what we would suspect in a way.
Yeah, I think so.
Like I use the analogy of if you two guys, Pat and Walter, are driving across country and you're driving together and I'm driving in a car to California by myself, I mean, think about it. I'm at such a disadvantage. I can't sleep at the wheel. You guys, Walter, you could sleep while Pat is driving. I mean, it's just amazing if you think about it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I have an advantage. I can pick my route. I can change my route. I can listen to Waze if I want to or ignore Waze if I want to. And that really captures the advantage for partners, but the advantage for having your own company is you can wake up one morning and say, you know what, I'm a little tired of that, what we've been doing. I think I'm going to take the company in a new direction. Well, you can wake up and do it. But if you've got a partner, don't try that.
Yeah, so, as you know, David, I have a partner, and I really appreciate all the talent and the skill and the complementary skill sets and knowledge that my partner brings to our business. And we're quite different in our backgrounds and in the way we think, in the way we're just operate. And so there can be friction, but the friction can be productive if handled the right way. But at the end of the day, what we have found is that because we have the same core values, that we can work through the friction that we might experience over how we're going to manage a project or manage some kind of strategy going forward. And so I'm curious, what, in all of your experience, what problems cause partners the most difficulty? What creates the most conflict?
Let me count the ways partners can get into conflict with one another. I think key among them is money and different ideas about how money should work and how money should be treated and whether we're really, really cautious about money or if we're willing to take some risks. So money is key. The roles that partner play in the business. You hear about turf wars among partners, between partners. Those are oftentimes who's doing what and who has what authority and decision-making rights. But you also have people coming and saying, yeah, I've got a partner, but I'm really disappointed because my partner hasn't lived up to my expectations. Well, that is a common problem. I often say to that partner, I said, well, did you ever tell your partner about your expectations? And sure enough, they'll say, well, not really, but somehow the partner should have known. And then, of course, there are personality differences and also just differences in, as you were saying, values, core values. It's not easy for people to know when they're thinking about forming a partnership with somebody, what are the values that person really holds near and dear. So all of those can get in the way. But what I like to tell people is the number one problem is not differences in personality styles or what roles you're going to play or those things, but it's a lack of planning. It's really most often boils down to inadequate conversations and discussions and negotiations among partners. In fact, one genetic researcher that we worked with years ago said, "Oh, it's like the DNA of partners. You're having them have discussions and negotiations and come to agreement." The DNA. And I said, "I love that. That's perfect. Partners have to figure out their DNA." But so often when you're starting out, there's so many things you have to attend to and work on. And you just kind of want to think this friend that you've had or this family member that you have, you can work together. You've known each other for years. But really sometimes that relationship, that existing relationship, even a trusting relationship of many years, can be a problem in a way, because you make assumptions, because you've known that person your whole life or for years, that if you were friends together or family together, you should be able to be partners together. But it's a little different. It's a little different game.
Let me ask you something I've kind of observed in a couple of client situations. What seemed to make perfect sense, you got the flashy sales guy, and then you got the tech guy. And they think, well, the two of us together are going to be fantastic. And I think they think going in that the one guy is going to be strictly tech and the one guy is going to be strictly sales. But as time goes on, and I guess it's because of the money, they each start encroaching on the other's territory in a sense. Mm-hmm. And so that just seems like a bad fit for me when you have just the two opposites coming together to form a partnership.
Well, they say opposites attract, right? But then you're right, it can often be difficult because they encroach and one partner's expertise is over here, but they start encroaching over there. But also what happens is as they get going, Walter, I think they realize, wow, you know what, our styles of communicating are also different. Right. And you're like making decisions in a heartbeat and out there doing things and taking off, and I'm a little, I need some more time to think about it. I need some more information. So typically, they've never talked about that. Yeah. They appreciate how they're different, how they complement one another, but they don't realize how their styles, their values really could get in the way.
Yeah. One other kind of real-life situation I think Pat and I deal with is an owner who's looking to sell, and maybe he's going to sell to a key employee group. So he wants to make people, bring people into ownership. When I have a client who is 100% owner and they're talking about bringing someone in, I always encourage them to start with some type of phantom ownership, at least for a year or two. Because I am nervous with they're going to bring somebody in, and all of a sudden they've got this minority shareholder. And I think there are some people whose personalities change when they become an owner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are your comments on that type of situation?
Well, I think that's interesting you say that. As a psychologist, Walter, I tend to think people's personalities don't change that much, but it's probably a different way of using the term. It's it's what you see, right? The relationship changes, and now a person's an owner, and people think differently as owners, and let's also say they probably act differently as owners. So the relationship they had changes at that time when they become owners. So in effect, I think I hear you saying, do phantom stock, which I love that term, phantom stock. You own stock, but you don't really own stock. So have some phantom stock and see if people with the phantom stock change. And maybe they will. I think that's not a bad. Any way you can devise, Walter, to test out what it's going to be like as partners is helpful. So that's probably the key reason why I decided to write a workbook about how to become partners. I had written the book, that you mentioned earlier, the partnership charter. In the early 2000s, 2004, it was published. And that was based on doing mediation, resolving conflicts among partners, and seeing how they got into trouble, and recognizing that there are a lot of different ways partners get into trouble, but there are really some themes here. And I found about a dozen themes, things that partners really should discuss and talk about and negotiate. And I put those in the book. And the book is kind of a primer on how to be partners. Remember, people are experts in their businesses. None of them is really an expert in how to be partners. In fact, it's not taught. It's just not taught. I for quite a few years, taught a course in the business school at American University on how to be partners. But I did some research on it and discovered that it was really about the only course on that subject in any business school in the country, which is curious to me. But business schools tend to focus more on public corporations than they do private. And now with the emphasis on entrepreneurship and starting companies, it's still curious, or it's even more curious to me, that there isn't more of an emphasis on, okay, starting partners, starting businesses, you need to know how to hire, you need to know how to get money, you need to know how to market, all of those things. But in addition to those things, if you're going to have partners, which most businesses that start up have partners, how do you do that? But they don't really focus very often on that. So the book comes in really handy. It's a primer. I used it as a text for the course, but it's really meant for average, normal people. And it really is meant to be like a road test for being partners. As you were saying, well, you could give somebody phantom stock, or if you work with them for years, that's helpful. But the idea behind the book is all of these issues that cause many partners heartburn and trouble, talk about them, really look at them, get some data, in fact.
So you're preventing conflict downstream,
It's
working
Pat,
to do that.
Exactly correct, Pat. This is all about conflict prevention. So I was like your typical doctor, you fix so many bones and things over the years, and you start thinking, wow, I've got to help people think about prevention. And that's what the book is. So it kind of walks them through all of these things. It has them take a personality test or a values test, and gives them the feedback about their values and their styles, and gets them talking about it. And okay, well, if you're a dominant person and that means this, this, and this in the workplace, and I'm more conscientious, how are we going to blend those styles? Let's talk about it, and let's not only get agreement about how we're going to do the money, but let's get agreement about how we're going to do our styles.
Yeah, so the name of this podcast is Exit Readiness. And describe how the partnership charter and the focus on conflict prevention can be a key piece to planning your exit successfully from your business.
It always seemed to me, I guess I learned to fly when I was in high school, actually. I became a pilot. And one of the things you learn as a pilot is you never take off on a runway without knowing what runway, in what town, what state you're going to land. You just don't do it. You just don't go out for a drive like you might in a car without having a knowledge. In fact, the FAA requires that you know where you're going to fly, how high you're going to fly, and where you're going to land. And maybe we should do that for all partners too. You've got to be approved. You've got to have a flight plan, and you've got to know what your exit plan is. But it's always seemed to me to be an integral discussion for partners to have. And as you two know, there are many partners who start out and they're focused on starting out, and they don't even dream of having the discussion about where they're going to end up. They're so busy starting out, and starting out is such a challenge. And but I've always considered it just an integral part of it. It's such an important discussion for partners starting out to have.
Yeah, and here's another thing I appreciate about not just the process, but the document that's produced, is that, it's not uncommon for Walter and I to have a situation where you've got a couple of partners. They've been in business for 20, 25, 30 years, and they started out, both of them, with certain ideas about the business, even certain ideas about their personal lives, and over time those things change. And whatever document or documents they may have put in 20 years ago, if they haven't looked at them intentionally, regularly, consistently, when 20 years goes by and all of a sudden they do have conflict and they dust off those documents, they find that they're completely inadequate to facilitate what it is they really want to do at this point. So one of the things I appreciate about the Partnership Charter is that it's a tool to help you revisit values, priorities, strategy for the future, year after year or every couple of years, whatever, but regularly. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. A partnership charter is not to be confused with normal legal documents. One of the things I like to tell people is that your normal legal documents, and many don't even have that. Remember, partners can get into business together and start a partnership and be partners without filing one piece of paper. So some partners think they're really ahead of the game when they've gotten an attorney and have legal documents in place. And I say to them, A, it's like putting the cart before the horse. You've got this legal document when you really haven't had much discussion. And B, the legal documents can give you a false sense of security. They can make you think you've done everything you needed to do when in fact you have not. So it's really the discussions about all of these things, and and all of that gets documented in the partnership charter, and that then is a very robust document that guides your day-to-day working together. And of course, you've got to look at it every year or so to check it out, talk about it, have those discussions again, see how it's going, and make whatever adjustments. Well, legal documents just aren't that way. You get them and you put them aside in a drawer, and then you wonder what you agreed to some years later.
Well, having gone through the process with you, an actual charter process with some clients, I'm a huge believer and huge supporter because it is very thorough. It covers all the bases, dots all the I's, crosses all the T's. David, in closing here, in summary, when should partners contact you and BMC for help?
Oh, great question. Again, I would say certainly when people are starting up is terrific, but also we've worked with many partnerships and family businesses that have been in existence 10, 20 years. I'm really so pleased with some of that work where people have been together, successful businesses. I mean, 20 years, you're successful typically. And one in particular that I'm thinking about, two brothers in existence for 20 years. They worked on a charter, and one of their comments at the end was, oh my gosh, if we had just done this when we were starting out, we would have been so much more better off. Because even after 20 years, having a business with 300 plus employees and I think annual revenues of between 3 and 500 million, so pretty successful. The charter and working together on their charter helped them actually reorganize how they ran their business. So, I mean, just amazing things like that. So the time to do a charter is, certainly at startup, but oftentimes later on, especially when you realize, we're kind of going on automatic pilot, and we should probably realize that there's quite a few discussions we haven't really had.
Okay, and so then if they want to reach you, how would they actually do that?
They can check out our website, BMC Associates, B as in boy, M Mary, C Charlie, Associates.com, or certainly give me a call at 703-465-1262. It's BMC Associates.
Thanks, David. Thanks for joining us. This has been really fantastic, very helpful, and I expect you'll receive a few calls from listeners needing assistance. I think we'd like to have you back at some point, if you're willing.
I love talking about partners and family businesses. So I'm happy to come back.
Very good.
So, Pat, what do you think? What do you think the key takeaway for our listeners is today?
Yeah, well, if you've got any disagreement that's heading toward conflict, deal with it quickly, as soon as possible, and get objective, neutral, skilled, professional outside help. It will be less costly in regard to time, and actually it will be less costly in regard to finances, because it won't drag on as long, and you'll get the help you need, and it will help to preserve the value of your business. And then even before there's disagreement or conflict, consider this roadmap of the partnership charter. I've seen it in action. It's quite impactful. It's very thorough and robust, and it can indeed help you to set up a framework where regularly and intentionally you can review each partner's goals, desires, aspirations, priorities for the business, and it also incorporates their personal goals. So get help for conflict as soon as possible, professional, neutral help, and consider putting a roadmap in place well in advance with the partnership charter.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So if you'd like to speak with either me or Pat for help in planning your exit, you can reach me at 301-951-9090, and you can reach Pat at 301-943-8203. Special thanks to Joe Ennis, as always, and the Launch Workplace for hosting us. Thanks again to our great guest, David Gage of BMC Associates, and thank you all for tuning in. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.